Joining us for this very important webinar in the post-COVID world. I'm delighted to have all the attendees today joining by Zoom, and delighted you've all plugged into it. The names of all the respective panelists are obviously up there for you to see, so I won't go through the introductions. I'll kick straight off. We've got roughly about an hour, so please feel free to write in questions, and then I will take those questions and put them to the panel. So please do that while we're speaking. That would be really, really good. And in the meantime, let's kick off with some of our set questions. So morning, everyone. Delighted to have you join. So the first question is about obviously the use of tech and how can we maximize the use of technology to service clients better in the post-COVID world. Who would like to kick off with that? Should we kick off with you, Andy?
Sure. Hi everyone. So I guess a couple of reflections there. Pretty kind of basic stuff really, but not for our industry, you know, which is firstly the use of cloud and just making sure that you know, the information you've got and you know the accessibility is you know, off your premises and into the cloud would be the first one. But the second one would be more a kind of customer experience one. You know, which is around making sure customers have access to the functionality, the tech functionality that they would need and expect, and also that our account execs, account handlers, when they're in the field, also can kind of access that information and functionality. And of course, you know, as we kind of move to a more browser-based world, a more sort of cloud-focused world, then that flexibility is quite important. And of course, during the crisis, we've seen that come to the fore pretty quickly, you know, so a lot of the industry had to react extraordinarily quickly to change business models, and I think we should look back and be pretty proud as an industry in terms of how we've reacted.
Right, exactly. So we've obviously to react very quickly. A lot of companies have, and I know, Carl, obviously you've got now quite a big company with lots of staff. In terms of that aspect of, firstly, how do we maximise the use of technology, and also just generally, how have you handled technology during this difficult period?
So, I mean, we moved from our branch-based network with lots of instances of a particular software houses software, and we moved to a cloud-based system around about 18 months, 2 years ago, not really with COVID in mind, but essentially all our data now sits in one place, and we had on our development plan the development of a virtual private network so that we could network all the branches together. When COVID hit, we really accelerated that program, and I think we compressed about 9-12 months of development into about a month. Our IT team, in fact, when I said to them, now we can see, you know, what we're capable of doing, they said, yeah, it's really good when you guys get out the way, we can deliver. But essentially our IT team did a really, really good job. It meant that our people could work from home extremely quickly in a no less secure way than if they were in the branches, and also in a way where if you like, the connectivity wasn't degraded in any way. The other aspect of our technology was our telephony, and we have web-based telephony, and it just meant that when people went home and plugged their work phones into their router using a special adapter that we'd sourced, it meant they were plugged into their branch, and so if a client phoned, say A Plan Whitney, they got through to A Plan Whitney and dealt with familiar people and so on. So the platform enabled us to get home very, very quickly, and it meant that the service to our clients was uninterrupted. So our average call answering time has never dropped below an average of 20 seconds. People have been able to get through, and our staff have been delighted. Actually, it was something we hadn't quite expected. They were just really pleased that we were able to get them home and working at a time of huge uncertainty.
So looking at that a bit further, just expanding on that point, Carl, really interesting. Is that something do you think you could use in the future with staff taking calls at home like that, with more staff doing that, or is it something you'll go back to how you were previously before COVID?
I think it's made us think about our model and how we might make it more flexible and adaptable. It's accelerated our thinking on that front. So our branches are now open to the public again, and we've got about 60% of our teams back in the branches in a very socially distant, compliant way. 40% of our teams are still working from home. At work, we are doing a lot, sorry, in the branches, we're doing a lot more of the collaborative type work, which is on quotations and any claims challenges. And back at home, where our colleagues are working, we're doing much more of the transactional type work. We found that several people, in fact, a good proportion of our people, in fact, have said they quite like working from home and they prefer to work a little later. So start a little later, start a bit later, finish a bit later, and so on. So we're kind of collating all those thoughts now to think about how we can use that flexibility to develop our business model and our client offering.
Right. So and that's obviously from Carl's perspective, with kind of multiple offices, and Neil, obviously you're kind of representative of the community broker. You've got 2 or 3 offices, is that right?
2 offices, yeah.
How have you found it? And
so I think pretty similar situation to Carl, really, but just on a smaller scale. Our systems, we were set up in 2006. So the way we set our business up was a very kind of, let's call it digital rather than paperless, because I don't think there's such a thing as a paperless office. But all of our files are electronic, everything's cloud based. So and I think one of the things from my perspective I'm most grateful for is that I've got a business partner who was much more had much more vision about what might happen with this current pandemic situation. Whether he's a pessimist or not, I don't know, but certainly he felt that there was a significant chance of us finding access to the office a difficulty. So early in February we were already talking about how we would cope with having whole or part of our staff not being able to be with us. So again, as Carl said, we're web-based telephony solutions, so we installed apps on all of our member of staff's phones so that they duplicated their physical handsets in the office. We were already cloud-based with our software provider and our exchange servers, so completely cloud-based on that front anyway. So when the time came to test these systems and to actually put them into use in anger, we felt pretty well prepared, and we've had a great level of we've probably had more accessibility to our systems all not being in one office than we would have had being in the office, if I'm honest with you, with kind of bandwidth issues with service supplies and things like that. So again, a lot of our staff have liked working from home. A lot of them are actually feeling like they want to get back to the office as well. So I think one of the words that Carl used, which I think is going to be the key for any business moving forward, is that level of flexibility that we demonstrate as businesses, not least in our client proposition, but also in our staff proposition as well. And those businesses that can be more flexible moving forward and want to be more flexible, and there's an appetite for it, I think we'll be ahead of that race when it comes to not only procuring staff for the future, but also the way that clients want to deliver, want a service delivered to them as well at the same time. So,
right, well explained there. So thanks for that, Neil. And look at the global picture. Moving to you, Adam. What's going on globally here in terms of the big movements?
Yeah, thanks, Axon. I hope everyone's well in this incredibly difficult time. In terms of some of the global trends that we've seen, I think there's been an incredible shift to digital technology transformations. I read a quote from the CEO of the online payments company Stripe last week, saying in the last 7 weeks there's been more digital transformation across small businesses than has happened in the last several years. So really, I think it's the current pandemic has forced companies to really double down on their digital efforts, because in the reality of the situation that we found ourselves in with COVID, if you don't have a good end-to-end digital service, then it's really hard to do business. So I think in the immediate future, we'll see that trend continuing, and it's really kind of with the view to solve for 2 kind of immediate problems. One, there's a large a large consensus and organization around cost cutting, and I think digital transformation can play a role in reducing costs for companies across the board, across industries. And secondly, just making sure that we have those kind of like end-to-end digital solutions that people can access easily wherever they are, rather than having to go to a physical branch, rather than having to pick up a phone and actually speak to an advisor or a broker in our world. I think some of the medium-term opportunities, and I think we talk about cloud a lot, and I know we're going to talk about it a little bit more as we progress through the conversation. But I think what's really interesting is what cloud actually enables us to do with our customers. And if we think about kind of like the opportunities on how we can really leverage some of the technologies coming or being built from cloud-based services, I think that provides brokers with a really exciting range of services to engage with customers in different ways, to better understand customer needs, and serve them better in their product use set. So I think lots of interesting developments. I think the shift to technology transformation, digital transformation will be here to stay, and will definitely be accelerated.
Excellent. So just moving on to the next question, because I know we've obviously got only an hour, and we talked about home working and this being the kind of new norm, and what kind of benefits has it brought, and what are the potential drawbacks as well? Who wants to kick off with that one?
I don't mind by starting to say that I hate the phrase "new normal." If that's all right for me to levy that.
You've heard it enough.
I just don't know whether I don't know how true it is. You know, we're in a situation that we've reacted to. You know, technology has always been well ahead of where we've been at from a cultural and societal understanding of what a working model looks like. And I think what COVID's been is a massive jolt to businesses and to even my grandmother's got an iPad now, and she's 80 and she doesn't even want a mobile phone. So it's been a jolt to how we all use technology to be better at what we would normally do physically. So, you know, as we move back into like an easing of lockdown, there's going to be a shift back, no matter how much we like it or not, to a demand from either our clients or from our staff or from insurers or from stakeholders to move back to more traditional models. So there will be a new normal. I just don't think we're in it at the moment, if that makes any sense. I think that there'll be a demand shift that pulls us back to how we did things slightly before, but we will be, you know, in a different place to where we were before this all started.
Yeah. You're muted.
So you're mute, something.
Andy, is this the new normal, or is it not, to use that horrible word?
Well, I mean, looking at the sort of employee experience, you know, it's perhaps right in the middle of it. It's too easy to kind of get a little bit dramatic, but you know, I remember I had the pleasure of being part of a business called First Direct. You know, when we decided that banking hours were a thing of the past, you know, we kind of changed the thought of how we viewed time. You know, so we said this bank is going to open 24/7, 365, you know, and suddenly the concept of time kind of changed in financial services with that. That's a long time ago. You know, from an employee perspective, you know, we may be in the kind of space revolution. You know, we just don't kind of go to work in the same way as we did. You know, again, it's a little bit. It's too easy to get a bit dramatic about it when you're right in the middle of it, but we ain't going to forget this readily, you know, as employees and as leaders of teams, you know. So I think there's a change. I think there's a change for good in terms of how people work. We've got to watch out for the kind of mental health and well-being of folk. You know, we again, in a previous life, we set up call centers where folk were operating individually from home, and the only reason that we came back from it, one simple reason was the feedback that we got was the folk were missing the social interaction, you know, of work, and we just got to kind of really watch out for that. And so I think as we move to the new normal, got it in now. You know, there's going to be a combination of the two, but I think our view of space, you know, and how we go to work, you know, has probably changed for good.
Yeah. I guess Carl, is a bit different, isn't it? Because obviously you've got quite a few staff in shops, and obviously they really need to be there. So I guess maybe it's a bit different from your perspective.
Yeah, I think first of all we're a long way off being post-COVID, so I think there's still a long journey to be trod. What we found with the really important thing for us has been around employee engagement throughout the whole process. So making sure we've had a natural rhythm to early morning calls, just rallying the troops, rallying the teams, afternoon calls, see how they're all getting on, and we've used things like Microsoft Teams as well as a really good sort of live communication tool to keep in touch with our colleagues sort of whilst they're actually out in the branches. What we found is that, and there's no surprise here, is I think that the idea of working home and the reality from working from home are two very different things for a lot of people. And it's probably true to say that a lot of personal relationships survive on the fact that you spend half your life away from your partner and the other half, you know, at home. So pulling the two together is creating issues generally out there. And mental health is a really important thing. It is quite isolating. To pick up on you know, Neil's point, there was a social element to work, there's a collaborative element to actually being in work, and it's really important. And when we polled our staff and when we started the engagement around coming back to work, we started 2 or 3 weeks before. We actually opened the door to let them know that this is happening, it's going to be happening soon, we'll be consulting and engaging with them. We worked very hard just to take views on board from our existing colleagues, just to make sure that they were comfortable with the journey we were going on. And then we explained what we're doing around health and safety in the office and how we're going to maintain social distancing. And we are prepared for a second wave, because all the talk is about a second wave. So we now know what we've got to do should we have to close a branch to the public and, you know, go back home. So I think we've got a few waves to ride before we get to again a new normal. I think it's just really important to engage your teams and your people in that particular journey, and making sure you're having really honest conversations with them about what is going to happen next, and if we're uncertain, why we're uncertain, and so on. So there is some way to go. For us in our branches, just as a final point, we're not in big city centres, so you know, we haven't got to worry about our teams using the tube or you know, crowded buses and so on. But we're equally very mindful of things like how do you get to work. So we're doing a cycle to work scheme. We're doing loans to, you know, for bikes and so on, so that people feel comfortable when they do come back.
And that's the big thing, isn't it? Because I guess, like you pointed out, you know, some staff will really want to, you know, return to the office. Some staff will want to keep working from home. So I guess as a business owner, Adam, we're probably seeing corporations and business owners and managers across the world kind of grapple with that that new concept of different staff desires in terms of home working and working in the office.
Absolutely, and you know, I think we're definitely in uncharted territory here, and I think companies have been approaching it in different ways. I think we've probably all seen the headlines of, you know, some companies have said their employees can work from home forever. Other companies are going to prefer the office-based approach. I think one thing that we can be fairly certain of is we're not going to go back to a model that was entirely the same as pre-COVID. And I think the other panelists touched upon it really well. I'm not going to repeat anything that they said, but some people very much enjoy working from home and like the fact that their family life and work life are a bit more balanced and are, if you like, the same. And with that comes greater flexibility. If you want to start early in the morning, if you want to work later in the night, and I think that actually raises some really important societal questions around, you know, rebalancing the role of the family, and it gives the men in families time to spend with their families and share some of the parenting parenting work as well, which I think is super important. One of the silver linings that's come out for me personally in this crisis. But on the other side, it's extremely hard for people, especially for those who didn't necessarily make a home decision based on the fact they were going to be working from home and living and working in that space for 20 hours a day. And then you do go into kind of the important kind of mental health discussion around somebody working from a space that often doubles up as their living area, their kitchen, maybe a workout area as well, the kids play area. So I think there's lots of it's too early to make a decision on what the new normal, there you go, got it in, is going to look like. But I think we're going to start to see some really interesting data come through on productivity, on employee satisfaction. But I think one certainty is that we're not going to go back to it's not going to go back to exactly the same as it was before the pandemic.
I think the point that Adam just made about productivity is an interesting one, because as a small business owner, we've been used to seeing people's bum on a seat for 7.5 hours a day, and that's one of the ways that we judge people's productivity, and that's going to change. Managers, leaders, me, have to be able to really understand what productivity metrics are going to look like moving forward. And it's been quite a challenge, actually. One of the things is that trust element, and having a situation where you have to try and trust people to be doing the work that they need to do from home. But I suppose, to a certain extent, if you can't trust the people that you've made the choice to employ, then then you've perhaps made some difficult wrong decisions in the past before COVID. So how do we measure productivity moving forward? Do we shift from that number of hours a day to is the work done? And then how do we balance that out between how productive individual employees are? Is going to be a big challenge, especially for businesses our size that are used to using our eyes as a methodology of working out whether people are pulling their weight to a certain extent.
You're on mute.
It's an absolute key question, isn't it? How can you trust your staff? Can you trust them, Andy? Can you trust them to be working all the time? Is it efficient for them working from home? Do you have that trust, do you think, with the staff?
I mean, absolutely. But Neil's point is, our experience over the last few months, we've seen our developer productivity go up. So there's your first kind of barometer. The thing is, it as a leader, it leads you to focus more on your output measures. Financial services is some kind of piecework, right? Because it's about output measures. What are you doing? What are your sales? What are your development outputs? And as a leader, it certainly focused my mind on how well we are measuring that, how well we are supporting folks to deliver against that, how well we're rewarding against it. And I think that's a kind of positive thing, as long as you can balance it with employee well-being.
Yeah.
Because and a lot of roads are coming back to that, and I think for really, really good reason. There are some folk who are deeply social animals, and we kind of benefit from that as leaders. We benefit from that. I mean, Carl benefits from that in his core business model. So focus on output measures. Increased productivity perversely from COVID is something that we've seen, but cracky, we need to just make sure that we've got a real focus on employee engagement, employee well-being, and employee mental health, frankly.
It must be crucial, because as Neil pointed out, people could be working in like converted kitchens, they could have kids running around, they're being asked to work from home, and they could feel slightly isolated, as you pointed out. They might need communications. There's one broker I know actually in the London market that's doing like nutrition plans and fitness videos online and all this kind of stuff, and their staff are loving it. So I guess, Carl, this idea of employee engagement, it's always been critical, obviously. Yeah. But perhaps now it's even accentuated a little bit further.
Yeah, I mean, I'd echo what Andy said and what Neil said. Your start point has to be that you trust your teams to do what they're being asked to do, and you trust them to do it really well. I mean, we've got lots of data points now where we can sort of measure productivity and so on, but that isn't really our point of focus. Our point of focus is around client outcomes and employee sense and engagement and value. And what we've noticed is that the conversations we're having with clients on the phone are taking a little bit longer, but that's because we're talking to them. And there's a real empathy when you're talking to people, when your clients, when they're working from home and you're working from home, all of a sudden, you know, the relationship builds out on another level. We've seen, so what's really important to us is our Net Promoter Score, and we measure that pretty, well, very rigorously. We've seen a real uptick in the number of people responding to our surveys, almost a doubling now, and our Net Promoter Score has gone from 84 to 86, which says that, and to us, Net Promoter Score really is a measure of how you make the client feel. You have to be efficient and you have to be effective. It's how does the client feel about the relationship and the transaction they've had, and that has strengthened during COVID really quite noticeably. So for us, what we're looking for is that feedback from our teams around how our clients are reacting. We see that in an improved renewal retention rate, and we're seeing that in an improved closure rate. So, you know, whilst we can measure how long you're on the phone and how long you're taking to do a renewal, those things are then used to try and help people who might well be struggling with their mental health, because if the productivity drops, then we are sensing that something's not quite right. Should we be having a conversation with that individual? So we're using productivity measures not as a big brother type tool, but as an indicator that somebody who's normally performing really well is somehow off their game. Do we need to have another conversation with them? But for us, it's all about what is the client experiencing, and they'll only have a great experience if our colleagues are delivering a great service in a really positive, can-do way.
Yeah, that's really interesting, Carl, that perspective on, as you talked about, just using the data points and getting that balance right and making sure the customer outcomes are correct.
Yeah.
And kind of in relation to that, actually, I've got a question now from one of the panelists. I think it fits within the flow of what we're talking about. So I'm going to put it to the, it's come from our audience. I'm also going to put it to the panel. And the question is this, and thank you, Chris Pearsall, for the question. The question is this: have brokers seen any change in customer behavior during COVID-19 in respect of customers wanting to increasingly access information and documents using things like customer portals or apps? Have we seen any sort of slight changes there, or is this just an ongoing trend? What do we think? Anyone like to answer that one?
I'm happy to start on that. So it's pretty well known that we've moved to Applied, and we use CSR24, which is the client document portal. We've seen the take-up rate on that double during the the COVID pandemic. So we are, when we're having the conversations with clients around electronic delivery of documents, they're very, very receptive. So it's just really interesting in terms of that take-up. What we have found, though, in terms of engagement, is they are really keen to speak to somebody. So insurance is still, it's not a commodity product, whether it's car or household. There are lots of elements of cover that do need explaining and understanding. What we have had is a lot of feedback from our clients around, and prospective clients particularly, how inaccessible some of the direct insurers have been and how that has caused them a great deal of difficulty, and what a relief it is to actually be able to get through to an organisation that can answer their questions and so on. So, efficiency, CSR24 provides efficiency and effectiveness. It gets the documents there quickly and accurately, but people still want that assurance of being able to talk to somebody. And I'm not sure that's going to change dramatically as we come out of the current pandemic.
It's kind of great news to the broker, because it kind of shows in the direct world, it just shows the broker's worth. I mean, from my own personal experience, there are questions which I always have. I use a broker, and you want those questions answered about, things like, it could be a question around the flooring or the structure of a house or the build or the worth of it, because if the insurance doesn't pay out, then obviously that's your whole livelihood gone. So, you want the broker, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, I had a really nice email from one of our branches yesterday that illustrated that point, where a client came into us He'd been trying 4 days to get through to his direct insurer, was surprised and relieved to be able to get through to somebody, and we've insured his 2 cars and a house on the back of that. So, you know, it's quite stressful when you cannot get hold of the person you need to speak to, whether it's about your renewal, your claim, or your midterm adjustment. And a huge relief, you know, if a broker is at the other end of the phone and is able to pick up the phone quickly and answer their questions really knowledgeably. So I think there's a big opportunity out there at the moment by making sure that, you know, we are collectively available for our clients and the public.
Fantastic. And that's just anyone else have a view on that, just in terms of, you know, that thing about the really interesting part, you know, kind of some customers having difficulty getting through to their providers, whether it be direct or whatever else, and actually, you know, being able to speak to someone at this very difficult time.
And can I make just one final point, actually, because it just proves the point that technology is not the answer, because these are reasonably well technologically sort of, if you like, platform businesses. So forcing people online when they don't want to go online is not the right outcome for the consumer. So as I say, that's where we see future opportunity. Sorry, Saxon.
And so I've got another question for the panel, slightly different, because we answered that one comprehensively. Here's a big open question, changing the rhythm slightly of our discussion, but it's always good to mix things up. What particular technology do the panelists think will be the game changer for the insurance sector going forward in this world of ours? That's a big open question. There's anything we're seeing that, you know, technology-wise that we're seeing? I mean, Adam, that might be one for you. Anything that we see that could be really impactful on the insurance market, or just generally the customer?
Yeah, I think I can start, Saxon. I think from what we see from across, or like developing at the moment, is around the application of machine learning on 2 areas of the insurance value chain. One around just general risk, so using technology to improve risk and underwriting models. I think we're starting to see some early applications of that across the world. And I think another area is applying the same or similar machine learning technologies to the claims management process to take away a lot of the manual processes and time that goes into effectively resolving a claim, to automating it with technology into something that can be solved for in minutes instead of sometimes days and weeks. And if we take the example of car insurance, there's been quite a few pilots now in the US where for minor accidents, of course, if you have a major accident, the last thing you want to do is get an application out and take a photo of your car. But if you have a minor accident, a few US insurers have built into their applications the ability to take photos of the damage. The technology will estimate how much it's going to cost to fix that garage. There's a number of other parameters that the user enters into the application, and if it's determined that it's applicable under the policy, they'll recommend a number of garages to take the car to instantly pre-approve them to go and get the work fixed without ever speaking to anybody. So I think that's a great example of how machine learning can actually drive value in across kind of like 2 specific areas of the value chain. I think kind of like looking at a little bit more into the future, if we look at a 5 to maybe 10-year time horizon, I think we've got some really exciting developments coming in quantum computing, which will, I think, transform every industry, including insurance, and will provide the industry to address unsolvable problems of the past. So if we look at reinsurance companies, some of the big reinsurance companies, in helping them being able to better predict or insure the uninsurable, as they sometimes say. But I think lots of interesting, real transformational changes coming when we see kind of quantum computing enter kind of like the mainframe.
And that's really interesting. It's a really interesting topic, and I know the machine learning is kind of something which let's just check I'm on Yeah, I know that machine learning is something that we hear about. I mean, but only yesterday I was reading about DeepMind, which is a chess computer, and within 5 minutes, it become the greatest ever chess player in the history of the world. And within 5 minutes of playing itself, and people, grandmasters who watched it, chess has been around for 1,000 years, said it was like watching God play chess, because it was just doing these things which they'd never seen before. And that just shows you the power of AI computers. And yesterday we had, I think, Peter Cullum saying that he thought within 10 years, 80% of underwriters will be gone to machine learning. We've seen the imposition of machine learning algorithms coming to claims. And it does really seem, Carl, Andy and Neil, that machine learnings and algorithms are going to be absolutely massive going forward in the next 10, 15 years in terms of potentially taking jobs, but also creating efficiency in the insurance industry.
Yeah. May I?
Yeah, sure.
At this point, I think that one of the things to make sure that we do today, you know, and I appreciate that there's huge, massive developments in technology that's going to be driven, and it's going to kind of come down through technology providers like Microsoft and Google and similar organizations, and that's going to cascade into organizations like insurers and like Applied. But for brokers, you know, a significant proportion of the people that are watching today will be working in offices that that have kind of tried to take footsteps in the first stages of what they consider to be a digital transformation of their business. You know, no doubt a lot of them will have, you know, files in filing cabinets still, and, you know, telephone lines which aren't web based, and various other parts of their business that are daunting to them at this stage, which don't necessarily feel daunting when you're talking about quantum computing and machine learning and things like that. And I think, from my perspective, I don't think there's any, to answer the question, I don't think there's any one particular piece of technology that's going to be a game changer for brokers over the course of the next few years. But what will be a game changer for brokers is for them to take those first steps, or the next steps that they're on, in respect of moving forward with their digital transformation of their business. That might be having a website. It might be looking at the portals like 24/7 that Carl spoke about earlier. It might be just basically having some level of automation in their system to pull documentation together from key fields which are already stored in their system, or even storing that information in fields on their system rather than on pieces of paper in a metal box in a room. And I think that, you know, that there's a significant chunk of our industry that are that aren't as technologically advanced as maybe people outside our industry will perceive them to be. And I think that what I would urge is any broker to look at how they can do things from a digital perspective and take those next steps, no matter how far back they feel they are at that process. There isn't a single business out there. And again, necessity is a great motivator, isn't it? You know, go back to my grandmother with her iPad. She doesn't even want a mobile phone, but now she can Zoom to keep in touch with people. You know, that necessity that's been created by COVID will hopefully push and jolt people down the next stage of their digital transformation. And I think that, you know, whatever that means to the individual broking businesses, and whether that's just going from filing cabinets to digital files, you know, as a first step on that digital transformation, will be a massive game changer for those individual businesses. So it's the steps that people take rather than the specific technologies, I think, will change individuals' businesses.
There's a great contrast, it seems, doesn't it, as you talked about, between what Adam talked about, which is the Google view of the great changes that are going to come to the insurance industry by things like machine learning and predictive analytics, even predicting when the customer's going to call and what the customer needs, to down on the floor is some brokers maybe still using papers and having things lying around on files and not even being on e-trading.
Not to dismiss anything that Adam said by any stretch of the imagination. You know, that the development of computing into our industry is going to be fast and furious over the next 10 years. But we've still got brokers who couldn't go into lockdown because of the fact that they have filing cabinets in files in offices where they had to have staff to access them. And like I say, you know, I don't want, you know, that's important that we bring everybody along the next stage of their digital journey and encourage that to happen.
And so I think we can frighten ourselves to death by the future, sort of thinking that we're all going to be out of work in no time at all. And I think if you just look at, for example, the driverless car, that was the thing that was going to you know, completely game change our industry by, I think, by 2021, when they were talking about it in 2015. So I think what we tend to see is a big wave of news stories and insight or futurology in terms of what can come, you know, what's coming down the line. I think what you then find is that what follows is if you like, evolution. It can be reasonably fast-paced evolution, but I think what we are going to see is the cost of technology is coming down. The things that we can do with our branch network today that we couldn't do 10 years ago is phenomenal. Has it sort of revolutionized our business? No, it hasn't, but it's taken us on a reasonably fast-paced kind of evolution. And so I would say to anybody who's not embraced technology, you know, you just don't need to be afraid of it. It's relatively low cost. It kind of changes the way that you do things, and it'll improve lives. It'll make you feel much more in control. And I think just, you know, keep in touch with what's kind of going on out there. So if we look at things, we were talking about data and so on, you know, 4 years ago, we had no data. Now we have a small data science team that we're using to think about propensity modeling for next best product for our clients and so on. So, you know, I've been in the industry 40 years and you know, there are people cleverer in this industry than me, but as an oldie within the industry, I'm very comfortable to leave and empower those who are far more enlightened in terms of what's out there and available, because it is coming, but it's not going to come as a tidal wave. It'll come over time, and we will all adapt and adopt. As I say, the cost is coming down, you know, quite considerably now, and it does improve. You know, the work-life balance and all those other good things. And from a consumer perspective, they will still want to be able to speak to somebody. So tech and so on will make, in the background, everything much more efficient and effective. But for most customers, most clients out there, they will still want their policy to be explained. So the big game changer for me on insurance would be is if all policies were exactly the same wordings, no exclusions, pricing was the same, and then there would be no need for us. That's not going to happen because, you know, all insurers have differentiated products and so on. So the policy still needs explaining. The client still needs their hand holding through a claim, but technology can really enable that to be delivered much more efficiently.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, just to your point, Carl, you can really see the, you know, as you say, the non-standard way policies have been distributed to customers in this crisis, and that, you know, obviously just the variance in business interruption policies, leaving the customers, you know, asking so many questions. I just suppose getting back to the just one final question of the standard questions which you'd put beforehand. Let's just do one more, because we've got a ton of questions coming through from our audience, so thank you for that. But let's just do one more of our formal questions we had done beforehand, and then we can tackle a few more from the audience. Just the final one, which is on the regulatory impact. How will this crisis change the regulator's approach, and will technology make it easier to deal with the regulator's concerns? I mean, the regulator and this crisis, I suppose, obviously business interruption and some of the key policies, like maybe things like terrorism and cyber. You would imagine, wouldn't you, the regulators and business interruption, of course, the regulators can be paying particular interest in these product areas of insurance, wouldn't you, Andy, following this crisis?
Yeah, sure, but I don't see that as being significantly tech related. You know, I think that the contribution of tech per se for the regulator is simply the more readily available provision of data and information, the more readily understandable view of the customer experience, you know, and what we're providing to them. You know, I'm not sure the regulator's approach will make a significant difference on how they rely on us and on technology. But clearly, there's some pretty important questions for the industry to answer in terms of policy coverage and the like. Sure, you know, and reputation and where that comes from. But you know, for me, not specifically tech related.
Not tech related.
Yeah.
And so let's just take a few more questions from the audience, but we've got lots of good questions coming in, so I'm grateful for their participation. And I suppose this harks back, this is from one person, from Michael Hasser. Mikhail Hassa, there was quite a big increase in various cyber attacks. Do you also see an increase in the appetite of requests for cyber insurance and cyber-related policies? And for that matter, policies coming out of the COVID crisis. Have we seen an appetite for cyber? Any new policies coming forth with this crisis, or just generally?
I think we've seen an increase in appetite for cyber quotes as businesses kind of dispersed to home working. I think that a lot of our clients have asked the question about, you know, do those increased exposures of people automatically working from home very quickly all of a sudden, and how does that impact on business, and is cyber a solution to that? I still think there's a massive amount of education that needs doing. I think some of the stats I read the other week, I'm not sure, 80% of all statistics are made up on the spot, aren't they? So 60% of businesses have had some form of cyber event, and I think there's still 13 to 15% a saturation of cyber insurance with certainly small to medium-sized businesses. So there's a massive disproportionate amount of customers that have experienced some form of cyber event but still don't buy insurance. And I think that as brokers, you know, we find ourselves in a very unique position of being able to kind of provide that advice and talk people through the policies, as Carl described. You know, that is our unique point in the market, that advice-led service that we provide. So, you know, cyber products and any new products that come down the line as well, we've got to be at the forefront of, to be able to push forward and develop that education with our clients, so they can understand what these products do and how they work, and how those risks can be transferred by insurance products within their own businesses. But I think the biggest challenge really outside of that is that, you know, we're used to change as an industry. We've kind of found we're very entrepreneurial as an industry. You know, we've had lots of change, whether it be, you know, increased competition from direct writers, the internet, and all these types of things. The interesting thing about COVID, from my perspective, is not really a change about our market position, because that remains the same. It's a change about how we deliver that market proposition, not just to our customers, but to our staff as well. And being relevant and flexible will enable us to be able to continue to be able to deliver that education about these types of products that clearly small to medium-sized businesses at the very least so desperately need.
And as you say, being relevant and flexible is key for a broker, and that kind of hooks into a question from Paul Walker, who wants brokers obviously to be relevant and flexible. And he's saying, you know, what kind of area of technology is out there that traditional brokers can easily adopt to impact their business positively? What would you recommend, panel? What's the kind of one area of technology? I know you touched on it earlier. One area of technology that you think brokers could easily adopt that could possibly impact their business. Adam, you got a view on that?
I'd say I think the video conferencing element gives people more freedom as to kind of like when and where they kind of like have that consultation with their broker. So
exactly, that's a massive plus, isn't it?
And then also I think we've mentioned some of the document management tools, just allowing customers to easily access kind of like the most important information around their policies whenever they want, without necessarily having to phone up if it's something that they'd prefer to do themselves. You know, we've already touched upon the in-person, and picking up the phone isn't going to go away, but I think having access to those policies and that information through a portal like we've mentioned is also something that is will hopefully be fairly easy to implement.
I'm not a broker, so and maybe I'm thinking on the wrong lines, but if you've got these great tools, you should talk about where customers can go in and they can access their documents online, they can change their address, they can change their particulars, they can do a lot of the work themselves. Could this lead to a reduction in charges to the customer, things like midterm adjustments and things like that, because they're kind of essentially doing it themselves, which I suppose is positive for the customer, but obviously might be a slight decline in revenue for the broker. Is that realistic to expect?
So I just wonder if there's an angle on linking together two or three of the last questions. You know, is there the prime role of tech is to take friction out of from the broker customer experience. And again, as Carl said, it's not really an Uber moment. It's not really a revolution that's going to happen. It's a fast pace of evolution. And once you kind of take that friction out, and there's still significant friction in the broker customer interaction. So that our job's not done that. But once you take that out, then perhaps it allows us to focus more on advice and making sure that personal, the value added personal advice on things like cyber. So we're sitting here with kind of 15% market penetration that Neil's already called out. It needs some more advice and it needs some more education. So we use tech to take the friction out. We focus more on the kind of people experience and the advice that we can delivered in models that are both tech and people focused. There's the kind of midterm vision for me.
So from our experience is that if you ask the client what they want in terms of digital delivery and what they actually end up using, they're two different things.
Right.
So even a change of address, for example, is not a straightforward just amend the record. It can result in an additional premium. It can result in a change in policy terms. On household, you have to establish the construction, the number of bedrooms, and so on. So there are very few things apart from, for example, paying your bills online that at the moment cannot really be self-served in a way that will guarantee or assure the best outcomes, for the client. To answer the question earlier around, what could we all do? I think, moving to a cloud-based system has enabled going from the office to home very easily. And I think what I'd be asking my software provider, and he's on the phone and he's on the call, and we've already got the answer, is how adaptable is my system and what have I got to do to be able to make sure that if COVID-2 comes, I'm able to work from home and so on. And if it doesn't provide that flexibility and adaptability, what have we got to do between us to make that happen? I mean, we're fortunate in that we've got an IT team. There'll be lots of people out there who haven't. So you've got to start asking those kind of challenging questions to your software provider around how can you get me working from home if that need kind of arises.
That's a good point, Carl. Sorry.
Yeah.
You go. Yeah.
No, I was going to say it's a good point because in our business, we're the IT managers. Myself and my co-director, we are the IT managers. We are the HR. We are all of those things. So you've got to have the ability to be able to rely on the resilience of the partners that you choose to move forward. And I think being in the cloud has been, without a doubt, the main enabler in us being able to move very, very quickly to a work from home lockdown coping situation. That, along with having a cloud-based telephone system as well, has enabled that to be a relatively straightforward process in respect of the operational aspects of being able to deliver it. But as we saw a few years ago, just because you are in the cloud doesn't mean that you have the resilience within your business that you particularly expect or like. There was a particularly well publicized event where cloud providers of a software system weren't able to even access it because of the failings within that provider. So I think the most important thing is when you are asking those questions that Carl's rightfully detailed there, is that you ask the other questions behind it as well about how resilient are you as a business, how resilient are you as a business partner, whether it's your telephone provider, whether it's your cloud services provider. What happens if something goes wrong with you? And how does that impact on my business? Because one of the things that this pandemic has taught me and has brought home to roost really for me is that there isn't anything out there that we can particularly put our faith in as being a constant, unchangeable aspect in life moving forward. And I think that what we've got to make sure that we do is we do our proper due diligence as brokers when we're selecting partners to make sure that they have correctly categorized data centers, that they've got the right ability to be able to recover from their perspective, whether that's the likes of Andy's organization or whether it's your telephone service provider or whatever it is that you use. Make sure that you really do have a good think about what could happen if it went wrong. And that's a lesson that I'd like that we've been through, and that I'd like other brokers to be able to learn as well, because it will lead to a more resilient sector.
Brilliant. I suppose we've only got 5 minutes, so we can answer one more question. And this, of course, is a very topical question. So I'll just try and see what the panel thinks. Has the negative publicity around BI claims changed the nature of communication between brokers and their customers? Are customers asking more questions about the cover they're buying and testing its value to them? So there we are, the question, the big question at the moment. Someone have a go at that one?
I mean, we've tried to. I think the communication that we have with our clients has changed. You know, we've become, over the past few months, a lot more conscious of explaining our position in the insurance cycle to our clients. You know, we aren't insurers, we don't write policy wordings, and I think a lot of the time we find ourselves in a circumstance where our clients just think that we're the insurer as well if we don't explain that relationship to them. So so we've done a lot more of that, because, you know, we're kind of caught up in this as agent of the client, which most brokers are. You know, we're caught up in that situation, holding our client's hand, being in the same position as they are in respect of dealing with you know, the fallout from this crisis, whether that be, you know, based on claims or just based on needing to deliver service when they needed it at the very beginning of that process. So yeah, we've changed the way that we communicate to our clients, because we've spent a huge amount of time explaining to our clients where we sit in the supply chain, to make sure that they understand what the capabilities and limitations of what we can do about things applies. And I think that leaves us in a much stronger position moving forward.
Fantastic. And that probably takes us pretty much to the end of the panel and the questions and the webinar, because we're coming to the end of the hour. That just leaves me to obviously say thank you so much to all the people who logged in, all the people who asked the questions, because there's been lots and lots of questions, so lots of participation there. Of course, thank you very much to our panelists, Neil, Adam, Carl and Andy. Thank you for taking the time there. Thank you, of course, to our sponsors, Applied Systems. It's been a very enjoyable webinar, and that just leaves me to say thank you very much to everyone for participating, and hopefully we'll see you for another webinar in the future.